Hello and welcome. Today we are covering principle-based ethics, also known as deontic ethics, found in chapters 5 and 6 of Andrew Kernohan's business ethics book. So you probably run into the idea of doing whatever creates the best outcome as a way of figuring out what to do, and that's a wonderful utilitarian logic. But what happens if the best outcome involves doing something horrifying, like enslaving a few to benefit the many, or torturing a bunch of people in order to save a few? Is that still moral? If you said no, you're probably looking for another way to think about ethics, and that's where principle-based or deontological ethics come in. Deontological ethics say morality isn't about results. It's about doing the right thing for the right reasons, regardless of the outcome. So deontological ethics asks, was the action right? Not, did it work? The most famous deontologist is Immanuel Kant, and he believed that morality is based in reason, not emotions or outcomes, and that we must follow universal rules that apply to everyone at all times. You do the right thing not because it benefits you materially and not because it makes you or somebody else happy, but because it is what morality demands. Now, why should we care about intentions more than outcomes? Kant gives us three main reasons. First is that outcomes are not always in your control. You can do everything right but still fail. That does not make you immoral, that's just how life is. Two, your actions reflect who you are. Being a person of integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard, and especially when it's hard. And three, rules break down if everybody makes exceptions. If you lie just this once, and everyone else does the same, truth becomes meaningless. And keep in mind that the only reason why you're looking to lie just this once is because you would prefer a different outcome than the one that you would get by telling the truth. And that's the idea of emotion guiding our outcome-based thinking. Now, if telling the truth hurts someone, are you still acting morally by telling them the truth? What if lying to people makes things better? Would that be moral or immoral? Kant gives us a way of figuring out what to do through his categorical imperative, which says to act only in ways that you can rationally wish everybody else acted too. Basically, rules like no stealing, because what if everybody else stole? You stole because you needed it, and by the time you get home, you've been already robbed 3 times by other people who also needed stuff. No lying, because the reason we're able to work together as human beings is by relying on the truth-telling of other people. But if you can't rely on that truth-telling of other people, then society falls apart. These kinds of absolute duties form the basis of human rights, and these are lines that should never be crossed no matter the outcome. Notice also, utilitarianism couldn't give you such things. Now, is there something you can think of that is always wrong, no matter what, no matter the consequence? Do you think that could or should be a universal rule, and why? And what would you say to somebody who said something like, well, I don't agree with it? Or if they said something like, well, what if I'm in a situation where if I don't do this thing, then I will die? Now, of course, principle-based ethics has its problems too, as does every ethical system, because otherwise we could be done talking about ethics because we would all agree on the thing that had no problems. So what do we do when duties conflict? If I have a duty to keep a promise and a duty to prevent harm, which one wins? What about in extreme cases? Is it wrong to lie to save a life? Well, you have an obligation to tell the truth, and you have an obligation to save a life, so how do you pick between these? And normally the way that we would pick between them is by taking a look at the consequences of doing option A or option B, and then pick the thing with better consequences. But remember, Kant has already said that you're not allowed to do that because consequences cannot be allowed to matter. And so these are places where strict rules can feel too rigid. But still, the idea is that morality has to be consistent if it's going to be real. Now, rights of any variety create obligations. If a person has a right, then everybody else has to respect it. And so we get two different kinds of rights. There are negative rights. They are freedoms from interference. So things like freedom of speech puts a responsibility on everybody else to not interfere with your speech. And these rights don't require us to do stuff, they just tell us not to mess with other people. But then we also have positive rights, and these are rights to something, whether it's education or healthcare or whatever. And positive rights require us to intervene and change the outcome in order to get the outcome desired. And you can think of it this way. A negative right to life just tells everybody not to murder you. But unfortunately, people don't always get that hint, and so you have people who like to do murder. And that's why you might also have a positive right to life, which means that somebody has a responsibility to intervene to prevent you from being murdered. We usually call these people the police. Now, the way that we use these ideas in business is through contracts. And contracts are going to be a matter of promise and truth-telling. But Kernohan warns us that not all contracts are by default ethical. So if one side benefits unfairly, that would make a contract unethical. Or if a side hides information from the other one, that too would make the contract unethical. And finally, if there's a huge power imbalance, that would make the contract unethical as well. But it's not that there is a power imbalance that causes a problem here, because there is always a power imbalance. Instead, the problem is if the side that has the advantage of power uses it to unfairly leverage that power in order to force a particular outcome. Now let's talk about justice, and specifically distributive justice. Distributive justice is the idea of having a fair allocation of resources and opportunities. So Kernohan asks, what does it mean for something to be fair? Is it fair that some people inherit wealth and others don't? Is it fair that jobs pay differently even if both are hard? Is it fair that people are born with talents that make success easier? How exactly are we going to define fairness? And should businesses be focused on fairness or just on providing a particular good or service? Now, the trick with distributive justice is that fair allocation of resources and opportunities comes in two varieties that Kernohan distinguishes. The first one is a formal equality of opportunity. This is the negative rights version, and it simply says that you are free to try your best to succeed and that nobody should get in your way. And the other one is fair equality of opportunity, which is the positive rights version, which demands that everybody has an equal chance for success. But there's a problem here, because of course there is. The choices that we make, and even the choices that are made by our parents, guardians, and family, and neighbors, they all affect our outcomes. Where we live, how we raise our kids, how we spend our time and money, these are all things that matter. Expecting people who behave differently to end up with identical outcomes ignores the role of behavior and risk, and of sacrifice and reward. Finally, to be clear, luck also matters. Not every hardworking person succeeds, but all successful people have to work hard and get lucky. You could look at the NFL as a great example of this. Not everybody who works 50 hours a week to try to get into the NFL will get into the NFL. But everybody who does get into the NFL does put in those sorts of hours. Now, luck has nothing to do with what you have or haven't done. It's pure accident. However, luck alone isn't enough. If you get lucky, but you haven't developed your skill set, you're still going to fail. Now, on the side of fairness and justice, Rawls argues that inequality is okay. In fact, it's even okay to cause inequality, so long as what this does is help the least advantaged people in our society. This is called the difference principle, and the idea is simply something like this. Inequality is not a problem in and of itself as long as we are using it in order to lift up the people who are the worst off in society. Now, on the other end of the spectrum on this issue, you have libertarians who say that everybody should keep their hands out of each other's business and not violate people's rights, and then let everybody keep what they earn and allow people to then spend their money as they see fit, whether they spend it trying to uplift the poor or they spend it by buying more bling. Now, which view here feels more just to you? Rawls' difference principle or the libertarian hands-off model? Rawls' theory has a side effect that says that if someone wastes their resources, then we should give them more in order to equalize welfare. But that ignores some pretty basic issues. Resources are limited, and so we cannot indefinitely keep handing out this wealth, not without harming people who are doing their best with their resources. Also, wealth accumulation is a major part of what funds innovation and jobs. If everyone had the same amount, then there would be no meaningful reinvestment and we would lose progress. Take, for example, Jeff Bezos. Whatever you think of him personally, He's responsible for 1.5 million job opportunities at Amazon, and they spend roughly $60 billion a year in payroll alone. And these are just the people who are directly employed by Amazon, never mind everybody else employed in the supply chain. So, of course, helping people in need is good, and it's necessary for a society. But the idea of pure redistribution can have serious downsides, because, of course, it can. So the idea of redistributing wealth on the basis of need tends to ignore the consequences of that redistribution down the line in terms of innovation, progress, jobs, and all sorts of other things. So what did we learn? Deontological ethics are about principles and intentions. Consequences might matter, but they're not the only thing that matters. In fact, the only time you could meaningfully look at consequences is if you're facing a series of already acceptable actions. Justice and fairness, like all things, are far more complicated than they seem initially, and ethics and businesses must navigate all of these tensions. So, when you make moral choices, are you more focused on doing what's right or getting the right kind of outcome for you?